At my wife's funeral, my son whispered to his wife, words so cruel they carved themselves into my soul. Now we just have to deal with the old man. It was as though someone had slipped a knife between my ribs, twisting it slowly, all while I stood frozen beside Eleanor's coffin. My grief was raw, a wound that refused to close. Yet even before the last prayer was spoken, they were already plotting my fate. The cemetery was quiet except for the rain falling in steady sheets that drummed against the canvas of the funeral tent. People filed past their footsteps, muffled by the wet grass. "She'll be missed terribly, Mrs. Henderson from next door," whispered, pressing my arm with the kind of sincerity that only decades of neighborly affection could bring. I nodded mutely, but my ears weren't on her. They were straining toward the low voices of Micah and Naomi, who stood just a few feet away, their heads bent together like conspirators. Naomi's black dress clung to her like something out of a fashion magazine, her red lips forming words that made bile rise in my throat. "The location is perfect for development. Once we get the property," she gestured carelessly toward the direction of our family home, visible through the thin curtain of rain and cemetery trees. That home wasn't just brick and wood. It was Eleanor's roses in bloom, her Sunday dinners wafting through the air, her laughter echoing down its halls. 43 years of marriage of dreams carefully stitched together, reduced to a real estate calculation, whispered at her graveside. Micah's voice followed, colder than I had ever known it. "Dad looks pathetic standing there. At his age, he can't maintain that big house anyway. We'd be doing him a favor." My chest tightened until I thought I might collapse right there in the mud. This was my son, the boy who had wobbled down the driveway on his first bike while I jogged beside him, who had held the hammer as we built the back deck together, who had once before God and his mother promised he'd take care of me when I got old. Now he stood in his tailored suit, smirking at my weakness, plotting to shove me out of the only home I had left before his mother was even laid to rest. Naomi's voice cut through the storm. "Your father will understand it's for the best. Family comes first after all." Her emphasis on family stung like acid. I knew in that moment that I no longer counted as part of theirs. The rain intensified each drop like a drumbeat of accusation. Umbrellas bloomed across the cemetery as guests shuffled toward their cars. The funeral director gave me a sympathetic nod, signaling the service was ending, but I couldn't move. I stood anchored by grief, watching Micah and Naomi exchange self-satisfied glances. Perfect timing with the old woman finally gone. Naomi murmured, her words sharpened by cruelty. "Now we can move forward without any emotional interference." Micah adjusted his silk tie, his lips curling into a humorless smile. "Dad's too sentimental about the past. He'll need a push to see reason." Then they walked away arm in arm toward their sleek black BMW, leaving me alone beside the raw mound of earth that covered the love of my life. Eleanor's yellow roses lay scattered on the grave, their petals bruised by the relentless rain. I knelt in the mud, my old wool coat heavy on my shoulders, and let my trembling fingers brush across the damp mahogany of her coffin. "I won't let them erase us," I whispered, my voice breaking into the storm. The drive home blurred past rain-streaked windows. I barely noticed the world around me until the car's headlights swept across our mailbox, the one Eleanor had painted with bright sunflowers decades ago, her laughter echoing in my memory as she dabbed yellow paint onto the metal. I pulled into the driveway, the engine humming softly, and sat there for a long while. The house loomed before me, dark and quiet, but to me it was alive. Every board, every nail, every carefully planted flower held the story of our love of our family. Now to my son and his wife, it was nothing more than a prize to be taken. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. Summer 1985. Eleanor calling me in from the garden with a smile that made every hardship worth it. Micah's laughter as he ran barefoot through the sprinklers, the smell of roses drifting through the open windows. This house wasn't just where we had lived, it was where we had loved. And I knew as the rain eased outside that I would not let them take that from me without a fight. Eleanor stood in the middle of the empty lot, her summer dress swaying lightly in the breeze. She stretched out her arms, pointing toward invisible walls as though she were sketching a dream out of thin air. "The kitchen window has to face east, Silas," she said with sparkling eyes. "I want the morning light on my face when I'm making your coffee." Her enthusiasm was infectious, spilling over into me like sunlight. She twirled once, laughter bubbling from her lips. And here, right here, we'll have a big living room. Perfect for Christmas mornings. Our children will grow up with memories that will last forever in this house. I was 35 then, strong enough to swing a hammer from dawn to dusk, and still have the strength to hold her close on the porch we were building together. For 18 months every weekend, we worked side by side measuring sawing painting. Eleanor learned to use a level, her brows furrowed in concentration, while I taught myself plumbing from stacks of library books. Christmas 1995. Micah was 10 years old, and his laughter filled every corner of the home we had built. He tore through wrapping paper beneath the towering pine tree, eyes blazing with joy. "Dad, look what Santa brought me," he exclaimed, holding up a toy tool set, a perfect replica of my own. "Can we build something tomorrow? Please, Mom says you're the best builder in the whole world." From the kitchen doorway, Eleanor chuckled, her apron dusted with flour from the morning's biscuits. "Careful what you promise, darling," she teased. "He's been planning projects all month." That very afternoon, Micah and I built a birdhouse. His small hands struggled to hold the plank steady, his tongue poking out in fierce concentration, while I guided the drill in his grip. "Someday I'll build real houses just like you, Dad," he announced proudly. "Big ones, houses where families can be happy forever." His gap-toothed grin melted me. June 2007. Micah's college graduation day dawned bright and cloudless. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with tissues as our son crossed the stage, a diploma in hand. An engineering degree following in his father's footsteps. "Look at him," she whispered, voice trembling. "So handsome, so accomplished." After the ceremony, Micah pulled us both into a fierce embrace. "Thank you for everything. For this house, for my education, for all the love. I'll make you proud. One day I'll give my children the same wonderful childhood you gave me." Eleanor's smile lit her entire face. "This house will always be yours, sweetheart. No matter how far you travel or how successful you become, you'll always belong here." That evening, we celebrated on the back deck with Eleanor's famous apple pie and Micah's favorite lemonade. Fireflies shimmered over the garden while we swapped stories and dreams. The future stretched ahead of us like an endless promise, dazzling with possibility. Spring 2018. Eleanor knelt in her rose garden, her hands tender among the blossoms, while Micah helped me mend the front steps. His voice wavered as he finally spoke. "Dad, I've been thinking about getting married. Sarah and we'd love to have the wedding right here in Mom's garden." "Would that be okay?" Eleanor nearly glowed with happiness. "Of course, darling. We'll make it the most beautiful day imaginable. This house was built for family milestones." But Sarah never became his wife. Their love dissolved quietly like mist at dawn. Then came Naomi. Now those once sweet memories cut like blades. Each one sharpened the distance between the loving boy I had raised and the cold stranger who now stood at Eleanor's graveside. When had it changed? When had love and legacy been reduced to nothing more than valuable property? The rain hammered down on the car roof as I sat staring at the familiar front door, wondering if I even recognized the man my son had become. October 2020. Dr. Martinez's office was sterile, harsh, bathed in the unforgiving glow of fluorescent lights. "I'm sorry," he said, voice even. "The tests confirm it. Cancer. Stage 2. Treatable, but it will require aggressive chemotherapy." Eleanor's hand tightened around mine, her eyes swimming with tears. Micah sat pale and motionless in the corner, the news hitting him like a physical blow. Finally, he spoke, voice cracking. "Whatever it takes, Doc. Money's no object. Just save my dad." His voice cracked with genuine emotion the day we first heard the diagnosis. "She's the strongest woman I know." Micah whispered, his hand trembling against Eleanor's frail one. "She'll beat this. She has to." For the first few months, it felt as though fate had stitched our family back together. Micah rose to the occasion, driving his mother to treatments when I couldn't bear the traffic, bringing bags of groceries, when the cupboards ran thin, fixing the little things around the house I no longer had the strength or time for. Some evenings he stayed late dealing cards across the kitchen table, while Eleanor laughed at his terrible poker face. I allowed myself to believe for a brief, hopeful season that crisis had healed the rift between us, that we were a family again. March 2021. Micah arrived for Sunday dinner with Naomi in tow, her first visit to our home. I remember Eleanor had set the table with her best china and the tablecloth she had stitched by hand when we first married, a piece of herself woven into every thread. Naomi sat down draped in a designer outfit that seemed to sneer at its surroundings. She let her eyes sweep over the dining room, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "What a quaint little place," she said, her tone airy, practiced. "So authentic. Very retro." Her words fell like frost across the table. Eleanor, though weakened by chemotherapy, still carried herself with quiet grace. She passed the basket of homemade rolls toward Naomi, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you, dear. We've been happy here for 36 years. Naomi waved the offering away with a delicate flick of her manicured hand. "Oh, I don't eat refined carbs, but it's sweet how you maintain these old-fashioned traditions." The smile she gave then was sharp as broken glass. That night after they left, Eleanor sat in her armchair longer than usual, her eyes distant, troubled. "There's something cold about that girl, Silas," she said finally. "She barely spoke to me. Not once did she ask how I was feeling. I didn't have the heart to answer." Summer 2022. The warmth we had rediscovered began to slip away. Micah's visits grew in frequent excuses, stacking higher with each phone call. And when he did stop by, Naomi rarely stepped inside. She preferred to remain in the car tapping at her phone while Micah rushed through pleasantries in the doorway. Eleanor's treatments had become harder by then, each round, leaving her weaker, her body more fragile, her once bright eyes clouded with exhaustion. After yet another hurried visit, she looked at me with quiet sorrow. "Why doesn't Micah stay longer, Silas? Why won't Naomi ever come in?" I had no good answer. When I phoned Micah, his voice was always brisk, distracted. "Dad, you need to understand. I have responsibilities now. Naomi's father is considering me for a partnership in his development company. I can't just drop everything for family visits." He said the word just like family was an afterthought. He didn't hear how deeply it cut. Fall 2023. Eleanor's condition worsened. One evening, she spiked a fever that terrified me. I called Micah in desperation. "Son, please, your mother's burning up. I need you here." There was a pause, then, his voice cool and clipped. "Can't you handle it yourself, Dad? I'm at a business dinner with Naomi's parents. The Vanderbilts don't reschedule for family emergencies." Family emergencies? He said it as if Eleanor's life, his mother's life, were an inconvenience. My heart sank, but I said nothing. Instead, I bundled Eleanor into the car, my hands trembling on the wheel, her cold fingers clutched in mine as we sat under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room. Alone. Winter 2024. It was the last time Micah visited before Eleanor's death. Naomi came inside for once, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floors Eleanor had polished with her own hands for decades. She looked around the living room, not with nostalgia, not with tenderness, but with the calculating gaze of someone assessing property. "You know, Micah," she said, her voice smooth, detached, "this location is prime real estate. Your parents are sitting on a gold mine and don't even realize it." Her words dripped with entitlement, reducing our lives, the laughter, the arguments, the birthdays, the Christmas mornings in this house, to nothing more than numbers on a ledger. Eleanor heard her, though she pretended not to. Her hand tightened imperceptibly in mine, and I knew what she was thinking. This house was built on love, not profit. And yet Naomi's words hung in the air, like smoke suffocating, inescapable. "Really?" I asked, my voice carrying more weariness than disbelief. Naomi tilted her head, her expression calm, calculated. "I never thought about it that way either." "But darling," she said, turning to Micah with a saccharine smile, "you can't let sentimentality cloud good business sense. Your father won't live forever, and soon maintaining this old place will be impossible for him. Wouldn't it be kinder, more practical to help him transition into something smaller, something more manageable?" I saw it then, the change in Micah's face. Where there had once been warmth, even if faint now, there was only calculation. Compassion slipped away like water through clenched fists. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened. Maybe you're right, he said slowly, each word cutting like a blade. Dad is getting older. That night, Eleanor wept quietly in our bedroom, her body frail but her heart still strong enough to feel the weight of betrayal. She clung to me, her tears soaking the fabric of my shirt. He's lost to us, Silas, she whispered, her voice breaking. That woman has poisoned his heart against his own family. 3 weeks later, Eleanor was gone. I stood at her graveside, numb, listening to the unthinkable my own son, speaking in hushed tones to Naomi about my future eviction. The rain had ceased, but the ground still glistened with wet sorrow. I lingered in the silence, staring at the house in the distance. From the outside, it looked unchanged, its bricks and beams standing resolute against the years. But to me, it was hollow, stripped of its soul. Eleanor's roses drooped in the garden, their petals heavy with rain, and the windows seemed to watch me with vacant eyes like a body whose spirit had slipped away. I climbed from the car slowly, every movement resisted by the ache of 70-year-old bones. The damp chill seeped into my joints, a cruel reminder of age and loneliness. Tomorrow I knew Micah would come with demands, with ultimatums, with that woman by his side. But tonight I only wanted to grieve, to mourn the wife I had cherished and the son I had lost long before. I realized he was gone, but tomorrow came sooner than I expected. Micah strode across the muddy cemetery grounds with a purpose that felt obscene in the setting. His expensive Italian shoes squelched in the wet earth, but he didn't falter. Behind him, Naomi picked her way carefully, her designer heels slipping in the muck, her disdain for the mud written on her perfectly painted face. "Dad, we need to talk." Micah's voice was sharp, rehearsed, the kind of tone he probably used in boardrooms, confident, commanding, leaving no space for refusal. He looked down at me as if I were not his father, but an obstacle to be managed. "Reginald has made a generous offer for the house. 500,000 cash. Immediate closing." The words hit me like a blow. I stared at him, my funeral program still damp in my hand, raindrops clinging to its edges. "At your mother's funeral," my voice shook with disbelief. "Have you completely lost your mind? Business doesn't stop for sentiment, Dad." He adjusted his silk tie, his face completely devoid of shame, as though the sacred ground beneath our feet, the fresh soil covering his mother's grave, meant nothing. "This is actually the perfect time," he continued, his tone smooth, clinical, clean slate, fresh start. Naomi stepped forward, then her red lipstick vivid garish against the gray backdrop of grief. She smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't meant to comfort, but to corner. "It's actually quite generous for such an old property, Silas. The location is really the only valuable asset you have." Valuable asset. My voice cracked with fury and heartbreak. "That's my home. Our home. Eleanor and I built every inch of it together." Naomi's expression didn't waver. If anything, her eyes gleamed with cold triumph. "Sentimental value isn't market value, Dad," Micah said, pulling out his phone, his thumbs moving over the screen, even as we stood beside the fresh grave of his mother. "You're 70 years old. You need to start being realistic." I looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time I saw not my son, but a stranger, someone who had traded his heart for ambition, his compassion for greed. And I realized the truth. Eleanor had been right. We had lost him long ago. Maintaining a house that size will become impossible. Naomi's voice cut through the damp air like a shard of ice. She slipped her manicured hand into Micah's arm, as if staking her claim. "We're offering you a graceful exit." The remaining funeral guests had fallen silent, their hushed condolences evaporating as the sharp edges of our exchange cut through the cemetery. Mrs. Henderson, clutching her umbrella with trembling fingers, glanced over nervously, her face drawn with unease. She must have wondered, as others surely did, why we were discussing real estate over freshly turned earth. Why a son and his wife would choose a burial site as the stage for betrayal. 40 years we lived there. My voice wavered as I clutched the damp funeral program in my hands, the paper crumpling, ink smearing beneath my grip. "That house is worth 200,000 minimum." My hands shook, not from age but from fury. "You're offering peanuts." Naomi's laugh rang out across the graveyard, brittle and cruel, a sound like glass shattering in the silence of a church. "Oh, Silas," she sneered, her lips twisting into a practiced smirk. "You really have no idea how real estate works, do you? That neighborhood is going downhill. The house is ancient, falling apart, practically condemned. It needs extensive renovations. 5,000 is more than fair. It's a steal, and you know it." Her words stung like vinegar in an open wound. I stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and my son, the rain beginning to fall harder, soaking into my coat, dripping from my hair. I could see my reflection in his cold eyes, and it was like staring at a stranger. "You're trying to rob your own father," I said hoarsely, my voice breaking with rage and grief. "On the very day we buried your mother. I'm trying to help you, Dad." Micah's jaw clenched, the mask of patience slipping from his face. The voice he used was low, hard-edged with steel. "Reginald's company has plans for that entire block. If you don't sell voluntarily, they'll find other ways to acquire the property. Eminent domain, code violations, tax assessments." He met my eyes, his tone flat. "This isn't a threat, it's reality." I stared at him, searching for the boy who once ran through that very house with scraped knees and laughter on his lips, the boy Eleanor had rocked to sleep in her arms. But there was nothing left of him in the man standing before me. Only ambition, only greed. "Are you threatening me?" I demanded, my chest heaving. "I'm warning you." His voice was sharp, final. "This can be easy or it can be difficult. The choice is yours." Naomi stepped closer, her perfume heavy even in the rain. She smiled a smile dripping with triumph, as though the game were already won. "My father doesn't lose, Silas. Ever. You should feel grateful he's even given you this opportunity." By now the other mourners were openly watching. Some shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, while others edged nearer, perhaps expecting the family dispute to erupt into violence. The funeral director approached, his expression stiff with diplomatic concern, clearly desperate to restore dignity to what should have been a solemn moment of farewell. "I think," I said slowly, my voice low at first, then gaining strength with every word, "you should leave. Both of you. Get out of my sight before I do something we'll all regret." Micah adjusted his expensive suit jacket with a practiced tug, his expression as cold and impassive as granite. "You have 48 hours to accept the offer, Dad. After that, things get complicated." With that, he turned, and Naomi followed her heels, clicking sharply against the stones, as though marking the rhythm of my humiliation. Their figures retreated toward the sleek black BMW waiting beyond the cemetery gates. Naomi's laughter floated back on the damp air, shrill and cruel, echoing across the headstones like the call of a crow. I stood frozen, my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded with a mixture of fury, sorrow, and disbelief. Beside me, Eleanor's grave marker gleamed wetly in the rain, her name carved into stone, eternal and unyielding. $5,000. That was what Micah thought our life was worth. That was what he offered for everything Eleanor and I had built, dreamed, and loved. When I finally returned home, the house loomed before me like a mausoleum, heavy with silence, swollen with memories that now felt like ghosts pressing against the walls. Every shadow whispered Eleanor's absence. Every room echoed with her name. Her reading glasses still lay folded on the kitchen table, as though she might return at any moment to finish the crossword puzzle that sat there half complete. My hand brushed across the worn wood where she used to sit, and for the first time since the funeral, the tears came silent, unstoppable, like the rain that refused to let the day end. The medication bottles stood in a neat line on the bathroom counter, like a row of weary sentinels, guardians, without a purpose now that their patient was gone. Their labels, once vital instructions for survival, now seemed like meaningless scribbles on plastic. My hand lingered on each one, fingertips brushing across cool surfaces, as if by touch alone I could summon back the mornings when Eleanor smiled at me and called me her personal pharmacist. I remembered how carefully I'd arranged the pills by color and dosage, how she'd teased me for treating it like an art form. It had been our ritual, mundane perhaps, but it was ours. The quiet pressed in as I walked into the living room, where the mantelpiece was still crowded with family photographs, a frozen timeline of better days. Each frame was a window into a world I could no longer touch. There was Micah at 5 years old, gap-toothed and grinning proudly, paintbrush in hand, as he helped me repaint the front porch. The paint job had been uneven, but his joy had made the effort perfect. Then Micah at 16, holding his brand new driver's license high like a trophy. Eleanor beside him, her face glowing with maternal pride. And Micah at his college graduation, arms around us both, his smile radiant, his gratitude so real it seemed to shine from within. I stared at those frozen smiles, my throat tightening. When had that love died? At what point had the warmth in his eyes cooled into calculation? When had we stopped being his anchor and instead become burdens, obstacles standing in the way of his ambition? I lowered myself into Eleanor's favorite armchair, the one by the window where she had spent her final months. She had sat there day after day, wrapped in her blanket, watching the birds flutter in and out of the feeder. She'd known each species by name, her voice soft with delight as she described their colors and habits. The chair still held the faint trace of her lavender perfume, woven into the very fabric. I pressed my face against the cushion, inhaling deeply, desperate to capture even a shadow of her presence. "Eleanor," I whispered to the empty room, my voice breaking. "They want to destroy everything we built together. Today, on the day I buried you, they offered me $5,000 for our life's work." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked on relentlessly, each hollow chime slicing into the silence. Time had never felt so cruel, so meaningless. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, lashing against the windows in furious rhythm, as if the sky itself shared my anger. The sound carried me back to the cemetery, to Micah's cold voice, as he delivered ultimatums beside his mother's grave. 48 hours. That was what my son had given me to decide the fate of our home. I closed my eyes and imagined how Eleanor would have reacted if she'd witnessed today's betrayal. I could almost hear her voice tinged with sorrow but steady with conviction. "I told you that woman was poison. She had tried to warn me." During the long months of her illness, she'd spoken quietly of Naomi's subtle cruelties, the cutting remarks masked as jokes, the calculated manipulations, the way she encouraged Micah to see us, not as family, but as liabilities. I had dismissed her words as paranoia, side effects of chemotherapy, clouding her judgment. My focus had been so consumed with fighting her illness that I'd ignored the battle happening right in front of me, the one for my son's soul. Now every corner of the house felt haunted by conversations we never finished, by warnings I had brushed aside. The walls that had once stood as our sanctuary now felt fragile, thin, almost transparent, ready to collapse under the weight of greed and betrayal. Thunder rolled across the sky, a deep growl that rattled the windows. A flash of lightning lit up the garden outside, and for an instant I saw Eleanor's roses, their heads bowed beneath the heavy rain. She had planted each one with purpose, the yellow for friendship, the red for passion, the white for new beginnings. They were more than flowers. They were symbols of the life we had cultivated together. To Naomi, they would be nothing but landscaping obstacles to be uprooted and discarded. At some point, exhaustion claimed me. I must have dozed off in Eleanor's chair, because when I opened my eyes, the room had grown darker. The steady drumming of rain had ceased, and the air felt unnaturally still. The silence was heavier than before, thick enough to press against my chest. The clock ticked on, but its sound seemed louder, lonelier each second, a reminder that time was slipping away, and with it, the world Eleanor and I had built. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows in golden shafts, spilling across countertops still cluttered with yesterday's half-washed dishes. The warmth of morning light felt cruelly indifferent, as though the universe hadn't noticed that my world had shattered only hours ago. I tried to cling to my usual routine, coffee brewing, newspaper, unfolded the comforting hiss of the kettle, but every movement felt mechanical, hollow, like I was play-acting the role of a man who still had a life worth maintaining. My body ached from a restless night. My neck throbbed stiff from having fallen asleep in Eleanor's armchair again, the only place in the house where sleep ever found me these days. When I leaned over the coffee pot, its reflective curve revealed a stranger staring back, an old man with deep lines carved into his face. Eyes clouded with grief, a man who looked every bit of his 70 years, and perhaps 10 more. The doorbell shattered the fragile quiet at exactly 8:30, its sharp chime echoing like a summons. My chest tightened. Through the peephole, I saw them, Micah and Naomi, standing together on my porch like smug door-to-door salesmen, peddling inevitability. Micah clutched a sleek leather briefcase, his expression cool, professional. Naomi's lips curved into a satisfied smile, the kind that made my blood pressure rise in an instant. They hadn't bothered to call. They didn't need to. In their minds, my surrender was a formality. I opened the door but said nothing. Micah brushed past me without hesitation, the gesture as casual as it was insulting. Naomi followed close behind her heels, clicking against the hardwood, her body language radiating ownership, as if the house had already been signed over to her. "We're here for your answer," Dad, Micah said briskly, as though this were a scheduled business transaction instead of a conversation about the ruins of my life. "My answer is no." The words came out harder than I intended, punctuated by the sharp slam of the door behind them. "Absolutely not." Naomi paused in the living room, surveying the space with predatory calm. Her eyes lingered on Eleanor's armchair on the mantel, crowded with family photographs, as if she were already imagining how quickly she could sweep away decades of memory for a clean slate. She gave a small, theatrical sigh. "That's unfortunate, Silas." She said my name like a curse, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "My father's lawyers have reviewed the property records very carefully. This can go easy, or it can go hard." I narrowed my eyes. "Is that a threat?" "It's reality." Without waiting for an invitation, Naomi settled herself on Eleanor's couch, the couch where my wife had once curled up with a book and tea, placing her designer purse squarely on the coffee table as if planting a flag on conquered land. "Judge Morrison owes my family several significant favors. You won't win in court, and even if you try, you'll lose everything fighting us." Micah set his briefcase on the table with a deliberate thud, snapping open the clasp with a lawyer's practiced precision. "We're offering you one final opportunity to walk away with your dignity intact. $5,000 in a comfortable apartment in Sunset Manor. They have excellent facilities for seniors. You won't have to worry about a thing. I'm not going to a nursing home." My voice shook, but the words carried steel. "This is my house. I built it with my own hands." Micah's expression hardened, his tone shifting into one he might use on a stubborn client. "Sentimentality is expensive, Dad. The property taxes alone will crush you in less than 2 years. The roof is failing, the plumbing is outdated, the wiring is a hazard. You can't keep up with it." "All fixable problems," I shot back, even as I felt the hollowness of the words. Naomi's laughter cut through the room like glass breaking. She inspected her freshly manicured nails, her voice dripping with disdain. "With what money your pension barely covers groceries. You're clinging to a deteriorating asset that bleeds value every month. Meanwhile, we have resources you can't even begin to imagine." Her tone sharpened, the pretense of politeness finally slipping away entirely. She looked at me not as family, not as a grieving man, but as an obstacle to be crushed. "So let's stop pretending, shall we? Either you take the offer, or you get dragged through hell. The choice is yours, old man. My father owns half the city council, 3 county commissioners, and more judges than you'd care to count. He can make your life very, very uncomfortable." Naomi's voice was smooth, dripping with confidence. She leaned forward slightly, her smile sharpened into a blade. "Fighting us isn't brave, Silas. It's stupid." Her words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest, not fear exactly, but a kind of icy clarity that burned hotter than any rage. "Get out!" My voice was low, deliberate. "Excuse me," Naomi blinked, feigning innocence. "Get out of my house right now." Micah stood slowly, snapping his briefcase shut with a metallic click that echoed through the room. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time that morning, his professional veneer cracked. "You're making a serious mistake, Dad. We tried to do this nicely." "Nicely!" My voice rose, the words spat like poison. I took a step closer, pointing toward the door. "You came into my home, your mother's home, 2 days after we buried her, and you offered me pennies for my life's work. At her funeral. Don't you dare dress that up as kindness." Naomi scoffed loudly, gathering her purse with a swirl of indignation. Her heels clicked across Eleanor's hardwood floor like hammer blows. "You'll regret this stubbornness, Silas. My family doesn't accept defeat gracefully." I opened the door wide, my hand gripping the frame so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Neither do I." For a long moment, the 3 of us stood in a silence so sharp it felt like glass. Finally, they moved. Naomi swept past me, perfume lingering like smoke in the air. Micah lingered at the threshold, his eyes softer than hers but no less determined. His frustration warred with something else, something that looked dangerously close to pity. "This isn't over, Dad," he said quietly. "I hope you understand that." "Yes," I answered, my voice steady now, carrying all the weight of 70 years lived. "I'm counting on it." The door closed behind them with finality, the sound reverberating through the empty house. Their car engine roared to life, then faded down the street, leaving silence in their wake. I stood in the kitchen, my hands trembling from the rush of adrenaline. The battle lines had been drawn. They thought they had 48 hours to wear me down. They were wrong. War had already begun, and they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated their enemy. 15 minutes of pacing the lonely halls bled the fury from my veins, leaving behind something far more dangerous than anger clarity. I stopped in the small office Eleanor and I had shared for decades, the air thick with her presence. 40 years of careful record-keeping lined the filing cabinets. Each folder was a testament to a life built brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I yanked open the drawer fingers, brushing past neat rows of manila envelopes until I found what I needed. The house deed, the clear title, no liens, no encumbrances. Every document bore the weight of time and diligence. Insurance policies neatly filed, showing replacement value at $200,000. Property tax receipts stretching back 4 decades, every payment marked on time without fail. And then tucked away at the very back of the folder, I found it, Harold Thompson's business card. The edges were yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded, but the name was still perfectly legible. Harold, my old friend. The man who had guided us through the original purchase, explaining every clause until Eleanor and I understood it completely. Memories surged: fishing trips before Eleanor's illness, backyard barbecues where our children had laughed together, late nights over dinner, where Harold's booming laugh filled the air. If anyone could help me protect what Eleanor and I had built, it was him. I carried the documents to the kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor and I had mapped out garden rows, planned Christmas dinners, and filled out Micah's college applications. Her reading glasses still rested there, folded neatly beside the half-finished crossword she'd started that last week. My throat tightened, and almost without thinking, I slid the glasses onto my face. The lenses sharpened the print, but more than that, they sharpened me. Strange how the simple act of wearing them made me feel closer to her steady strategic mind. "They think I'm just a helpless old man," I murmured into the stillness, my eyes fixed on her empty chair. "They're about to learn otherwise." And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something stir in my chest that wasn't grief or despair. It was resolve. My engineering background had trained me to dismantle problems, the way one dismantled a machine piece by piece, variable by variable, until the moving parts revealed the truth. Numbers didn't lie, and neither did structures unless you ignored the foundations. So what were the variables here? Micah's angle was clear. He wanted the house not out of sentiment, but as part of Reginald's gleaming development project. Their tactics were obvious: intimidation, threats, the arrogance of money and influence. They assumed I'd buckle under the weight of their pressure, that grief and age had softened me into someone pliable. But they had overlooked the one constant that could not be shaken: legitimate ownership. This house wasn't some speculative investment or corporate asset. It was 40 years of sweat, discipline, and community ties that ran deeper than any crooked handshake in a judge's chamber. Eleanor used to tease me about this very thing. "You're too methodical, Silas." She'd laugh, shaking her head when I spent an entire afternoon calculating the best irrigation layout for our tiny garden. "You'll miss your own funeral because you're still running scenarios in your head." Maybe she had been right then, but not now. That methodical mind, cold, precise, and steady, was exactly what I needed. Emotion had gotten me nowhere this morning, not with Naomi's sneering threats or Micah's disappointed eyes. Rage was useless. Strategy, though. Strategy could win a war. I sat down at the kitchen table, Harold Thompson's faded business card resting between my fingers. I remembered the day he'd handed it to me back in 1995, after walking us through every line of legalese like a patient teacher. He'd refused any extra payment, brushing away my insistence with a firm hand. "Friends don't charge friends for doing what's right," he had said. I wondered if he still believed that now, decades later. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11:30, the familiar chimes echoing through the empty house like a summons. By now, Harold would be at his office, probably buried in contracts or prepping for a small-town court case. I picked up the phone, the number still etched into my memory after 40 years. For a moment I hesitated, wondering if he still answered his own calls or if time had made him untouchable too. The next morning, resolve carried me downtown to Evergreen's Main Street. Nothing had changed. The same modest storefronts, the barbershop pole spinning lazily, American flags swaying from the lampposts. It was the kind of place where handshake deals still carried the weight of law, where reputations weren't just whispered, they were lived. Harold's office was a modest brick building with a brass plaque that had dulled but never tarnished. His secretary, a woman whose kind eyes reminded me of Eleanor, ushered me in without delay. The office smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Law books lined every wall, their spines worn from decades of use. Framed photographs of his children and grandchildren sat proudly on the shelves alongside certificates of honor from the town council. And there was Harold, older, grayer, his hair thinner now, but his presence unchanged. His handshake was still firm, his eyes still sharp with the same intelligence that had made him Evergreen's most respected attorney. Silas, he said softly, the name weighted with years of friendship. I was so sorry to hear about Eleanor. She was a remarkable woman. The air caught in my chest at the sound of her name spoken aloud, but I nodded, forcing myself to focus. Harold gestured to a chair across from his desk, already cluttered with legal briefs and contracts. Your call yesterday concerned me greatly, he said. Tell me everything. So I did. I laid it all out, the overheard whispers at the funeral. Micah's insulting offer, Naomi's smug threats about corrupt judges and forced sales. As I spoke, Harold's expression grew darker, the lines on his face deepening, his jaw tightening with each revelation. He shook his head slowly, disbelief etched in every movement. I can't believe Micah would do this, he muttered, finally leaning back in his chair, especially now, so soon after losing Eleanor. This isn't just callous, Silas. It's vicious. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Can they actually force me to sell? Harold reached for the deed I had brought, slipping on his reading glasses. He examined it with the care of a surgeon, each detail scrutinized. Finally, he looked up. Your ownership is absolutely clear, he said with certainty. No lines, no disputes, no legal grounds for a forced sale. Legally, this house is yours beyond contest. A flicker of relief passed through me, but Harold's pause gave me no comfort. His tone shifted, more cautious now. However, the threats about corrupt judges aren't entirely empty. Judge Morrison in particular does have a reputation for favoring certain developers. He's not brazen enough to make a ruling without precedent, but in this county, even the appearance of favoritism can muddy the waters. Something this blatant would draw attention, yes, but that doesn't mean it won't be tried. I gripped the armrest of my chair. So what are my options? Harold leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. The conventional path, document everything. Every conversation, every threat. File formal complaints. Take them to court. On the law alone, you'd almost certainly win. He sighed, his eyes narrowing. But it would take years. It would cost thousands. And in the meantime, they'd keep applying pressure. They're counting on wearing you down long before a verdict is reached. The silence that followed pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. Years, thousands, pressure. My children wanted me to believe I was too old to fight. Maybe they were counting on that too. But Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind, steady as ever. Don't let them mistake patience for weakness. And for the first time in days, I felt something like fire stir in my chest again. Harold leaned back in his leather chair, fingertips pressed together in quiet calculation. His eyes fixed on me with the weight of someone about to deliver news that could change the entire trajectory of my life. Silas, he said at last, his voice steady but tinged with gravity. There is another way, a solution that would protect your home permanently, no matter what pressure Micah or Naomi try to exert. My heart thudded in my chest. I'm listening. Charitable transfer with lifetime occupancy rights. Harold explained the words slow and deliberate. You legally donate the house to a recognized nonprofit or charitable organization. You take the tax deduction, but more importantly, you retain the irrevocable right to live here until the end of your days. The charity gains a valuable asset for its mission, and you gain the one thing you need most: absolute security. Once it's transferred, your children, creditors, or anyone else cannot touch it. The house becomes untouchable, permanent. The simplicity of the plan was breathtaking. It cut through Micah's threats, Naomi's smug assurances, even the shadow of corrupt judges. They couldn't bulldoze this. They couldn't manipulate this. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt a flicker of control returning. Harold reached for his battered leather address book, flipping through well-worn pages, until he stopped at a business card tucked inside. He slid it across the desk. Hope Against Cancer Foundation. They're based in Richmond. Outstanding reputation. And considering Eleanor's struggle, I can't think of a more fitting tribute. My fingers lingered on the card. The logo was simple, a ribbon of hope. Eleanor would have approved. She'd given what little we could afford during her treatments, always insisting even the smallest contribution mattered. I could almost hear her voice. If you can make someone else's burden lighter, Silas, then you've lived well. I look back at Harold's resolve hardening in my chest. How quickly can this be arranged? If you're serious, I can call today, Harold replied, already reaching for the phone. We could have you in their offices tomorrow. The paperwork itself doesn't take long. Once it's filed, the protection is immediate. Ironclad. Do it, I said, sharper than intended, but certainty had replaced doubt. Harold hesitated, phone in hand, and studied me. Silas, before I make this call, I need you to understand something. This decision is final. Once it's transferred, you cannot sell, cannot change your mind. You'll live here as long as you breathe, but the house will no longer be yours to give or trade. Are you sure? My eyes drifted to the window, where Eleanor's roses still climbed the trellis she'd tended so faithfully. I thought of Micah's cold, calculating stare at her funeral, Naomi's laughter in my living room, and the decades of sweat, laughter, and tears poured into these walls. This house wasn't just wood and brick. It was Eleanor's spirit, our life, and I would not see it desecrated for profit. Harold, I said finally, my voice thick but steady, I've never been more certain of anything. The next morning I drove to Richmond. The route wound through Virginia's countryside, the same rolling hills Eleanor had loved on Sunday drives. Horse farms stretched across the horizon, their fences glistening in the late morning sun. The landscape whispered of permanence, of roots planted deep, and with every mile I felt Eleanor's presence beside me. I had called in sick to my part-time consulting job. There were things in life more important than routine obligations, more urgent than the facade of normalcy. Today was about legacy. The Hope Against Cancer Foundation stood just outside the medical district, its modern glass facade gleaming with quiet dignity. Inside the lobby was a gallery of courage photographs of survivors smiling, with families' plaques commemorating breakthroughs, letters from children who'd beaten impossible odds. It felt less like an office and more like a sanctuary of perseverance. A woman approached, poised and warm. Mr. Hicks and Margaret Chen, development director. Harold Thompson told us about your situation. First, allow me to say how deeply sorry we are for your loss. Cancer spares no family, and memorial gifts like yours mean more than words can express. They carry forward the fight. Her sincerity caught me off guard. For a moment, my throat tightened. All I could manage was a nod. Margaret guided me to a quiet conference room. Waiting inside was David Rodriguez, the foundation's legal counsel, a sharp-eyed man with a calm demeanor. A neatly stacked pile of documents lay before him, crisp and orderly, the paperwork that would decide the future of my home. Margaret folded her hands gently on the table. We're here to help you, Mr. Hicks, and to ensure Eleanor's legacy lives on in a way that honors her life and the love you both shared. I pulled in a breath, feeling Eleanor in the room as clearly as if she'd been sitting across from me. Let's begin. The appraisal Harold had arranged came back with a figure that stunned me, $200,000 neat and exact. 40 times higher than the insult Micah had dared to call an offer. The number wasn't just ink on paper. It was validation, proof that this home, Eleanor's home, carried weight far beyond what my son's greed could measure. David Rodriguez slid the report toward me across the polished oak conference table, his calm, deliberate tone steadying the whirlwind inside my chest. The process is straightforward, he said, neatly arranging the legal papers in front of us like a general preparing for battle. You'll be transferring ownership of the property to the Hope Against Cancer Foundation under what's called a retained life estate. This means you receive a charitable tax deduction for the full appraised value. More importantly, you retain the absolute irrevocable right to occupy this house for the rest of your life. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing, clinging to his words. And no one can force me to sell. David shook his head firmly. Impossible. Once the foundation accepts this donation, the property legally belongs to us. It cannot be seized, sold, or transferred by anyone except the foundation. And let me assure you, we have no interest in disturbing your occupancy. Your home is protected permanently. Margaret, seated beside him, gave me a gentle smile as she glanced over the donation documents. Her voice carried warmth, but also reverence. This gift will do more than safeguard your home, Mr. Hicks. It will directly fund cancer research programs that may save lives in the future. And if I may, she paused, her eyes softening. We were moved by what Harold told us about your wife's garden, the roses she loved so dearly. We'd like to honor her by creating a memorial healing space, something quiet and beautiful for patients and families who come here seeking strength. Her words hit me like a wave. Eleanor's roses, not just blossoms in our yard, but living testaments to her love and resilience carried forward into a place where strangers would find hope in their darkest hours. My throat tightened, my eyes burning as the vision unfolded, patients sitting in that garden, breathing in the fragrance Eleanor once tended with her own hands, drawing courage from her silent legacy. She would have loved that. God, she would have loved that. 3 hours passed in a blur of signatures, initials, explanations, and affirmations. Ink flowed onto paper, but what I was really inscribing was Eleanor's memory into something far larger than myself. When it was done, when every line had been signed, every seal stamped, I stepped out of the foundation's offices with more than documents. I carried with me a shield of law, ironclad protections that no greedy hand could rip away. For the first time since Eleanor's diagnosis, I felt the sting of justice, sharp and cleansing. My house was safe, her memory honored, and Micah's little scheme. It had collapsed before it even began, reduced to dust by the stroke of a pen. Driving home through the Virginia hills, I rolled the windows down, letting the familiar air wash over me. The countryside blurred past rolling fields, split-rail fences, old barns that seemed to stand on pride alone. With each mile, the weight on my chest lightened. On the passenger seat lay the foundation's stamped copy of the deed transfer, official and unassailable. I glanced at it now and then as though it were a shield forged from Eleanor's spirit itself, warding off every corrupt judge, every lawyer for hire, every whispered threat the Vanderbilts could muster. Let them come. Let them bring their lies, their schemes, their arrogance. They were too late. Tomorrow I'd look my son in the eye. He thought I was an old man with no fight left, a mark ripe for the taking, candy plucked from a child's hand. But tomorrow he would learn the truth. His father still had teeth. His father still knew how to fight. And now, with Eleanor's memory etched in roses and law alike, his father had already won. Eleanor would have been proud. I could almost hear her soft laughter, the way she used to clasp her hands together when I surprised her with some small act of defiance against the odds. 28 hours had passed since I signed the foundation papers, and in that time something inside me had shifted. My hands no longer trembled with uncertainty. The fear that had clung to me like a shadow was gone. Instead, my grip on the cordless phone was steady, almost theatrical, as though I were holding a prop before stepping onto a stage. Micah expected weakness. He expected a man broken by grief, bent by age, ready to surrender. That's the role I had chosen to play for him, and I intended to perform it flawlessly. At exactly 7:00, I dialed his number. The rehearsed tone of defeat played itself in my head like an old record. He answered on the second ring, his voice brisk, clipped, businesslike. "Dad," I let my breath falter, let a crack slip into my voice. "Son, I've been doing a lot of thinking since your visit yesterday." There was a pause, just a fraction of surprise before he spoke again. "Dad, I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon." His voice carried something almost boyish, but it was painted over with calculation. I leaned into the script. Maybe you and Naomi were right. Maybe I've been too sentimental about this old place." I let silence hang heavy and deliberate. On the other end, I could almost feel his smile forming sharp and hungry. "Daddy," said, his words smooth, satisfied. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Naomi and I were worried you'd make things harder than necessary." I lowered my voice, softened it until it sounded small, almost broken. Your mother always said families should stick together, especially in difficult times. I've been lonely, Micah. Since Eleanor passed, it would mean a lot to have you both here. Why don't you come to dinner tomorrow? We can discuss the details properly, like a family should. He didn't hesitate. He didn't need to. Triumph practically dripped through the receiver. That sounds perfect. Naomi and I will be there. 6:30. Good, I said gently, lowering my voice to a whisper. I'll make Eleanor's pot roast, the way she used to on Sundays when you were young. We exchanged our goodbyes and then I hung up. Slowly, deliberately, I let the mask slip away. The smile that spread across my face would have chilled both of them to the bone. They thought they were walking into a victory dinner, that their prize was already plated and waiting. What they didn't know was that they were walking into the most satisfying conversation of my life. That night, I busied myself in the kitchen. I pulled Eleanor's handwritten recipe cards from the drawer, her delicate script almost trembling with age but steady enough to guide my hands. The smell of onions sizzling in butter filled the house, wrapping me in the warmth of memory. Every task, peeling carrots, seasoning the roast, kneading bread, was an act of communion with her. I could almost feel her presence at my side, approving, encouraging. She would have loved this, I whispered to myself as I wiped my hands on a towel. Justice served in the form of her recipes. Justice unfolding in the very home they had schemed to steal. Tomorrow could not come soon enough. And then it did. They arrived at 6:30 sharp, punctual as predators. Micah wore his most expensive suit as if signing away my life's worth were no different than closing a corporate deal. Naomi swept in behind him, draped in designer silk, each detail of her outfit more ostentatious than the last. They didn't look like family visiting for dinner. They looked like conquerors inspecting new territory. Micah leaned in his eyes, scanning me like a physician evaluating an old patient. Dad, you look better than yesterday. His voice was clinical, detached, as though my health were nothing more than a variable in a transaction. Naomi, meanwhile, drifted into the living room. Her heels clicked against Eleanor's hardwood floors, the same ones Eleanor had insisted on polishing every spring. Naomi's hand grazed the edge of Eleanor's antique cabinet, her touch casual, proprietary, like she was already measuring the space for where her things would go. These old pieces, she murmured with a faint smile, they might have some vintage value. I watched her from the doorway, my jaw tightening, but my smile never faltered. They thought they owned the room already. They thought they owned me. What they didn't know was that every word, every gesture tonight was nothing but rope, and I was letting them tie it around their own necks. We'll need an appraiser before the estate sale, Naomi said casually, as though she were talking about buying curtains rather than dismantling a life. I carried the tray into the dining room, setting out Eleanor's good china. The delicate porcelain plates glimmered under the chandelier's glow, each piece painted with the tiny blue flowers she had adored. These were the dishes we reserved for anniversaries, Christmas dinners, and birthdays, the meals when Micah still looked at us with love instead of calculation. Tonight they were sullied by spinach dip and hors d'oeuvres consumed by people who saw them as nothing more than placeholders until newer, shinier things arrived. They ate without comment, without acknowledgement, their conversation flowing easily around me as though I were an invisible servant, rather than the man who raised Micah. Renovation plans, demolition timelines, budget estimates, it all spilled out in brisk tones, stripped of sentiment, as if 40 years of life in these walls meant nothing at all. Reginald's contractors can start within 2 weeks, Naomi explained between bites of Eleanor's famous spinach dip, her lipstick staining the rim of Eleanor's favorite china teacup. The entire neighborhood is zoned for commercial development now. Your little house is actually the last holdout. I forced a smile, smothering the surge of bile that rose in my throat. Really, I managed my voice, sounding impressed instead of disgusted. How efficient. Dinner arrived. Eleanor's pot roast simmered to perfection, filling the air with the scent of rosemary and garlic. But the meal wasn't shared with reverence or memory. It was dissected alongside their plans for my disposal. Micah's tone was smooth, precise, detached like a funeral director, explaining burial options to a grieving widow. Sunset Manor has an opening in their assisted living wing, he announced, cutting his meat with surgical neatness. The $5,000 will cover your security deposit. Your pension can handle the monthly fees. We've already spoken to the administrator. Naomi dabbed her lips with one of Eleanor's embroidered napkins. It's really the best option, Silas. Mom would have wanted you to be practical about your future. Micah nodded gravely, his fork clinking against china. She always worried about you managing alone. The words sliced through me sharper than any blade. To invoke Eleanor's memory, her boundless love, her gentle heart to justify their theft, was cruelty wrapped in silk. My blood pressure spiked, heat flooding my temples, but my face remained a mask of weary resignation. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing my rage. They were so close to victory that they no longer bothered to hide their triumph. Naomi raised her glass of wine, her smile bright, false, cruel. Finally, you're being sensible about this situation, Silas, she said, her tone patronizing a mock toast. Fighting us would have been expensive and pointless. This way, everyone wins. Everyone wins, I repeated softly, letting the words linger on my tongue like poison. Inside, I thought of the foundation documents tucked safely in Eleanor's desk drawer upstairs. The ink was dry, the signature secure. The future they thought they controlled had already slipped through their hands. Dessert was Eleanor's apple pie baked from the recipe card smudged with her handwriting. But instead of savoring the sweetness of memory, they picked at it while discussing demolition schedules, concrete pours, and foundation work. Their casual erasure of 40 years was spoken in the sterile language of architecture, as if bulldozers and blueprints could obliterate love itself. Naomi rose between bites, strolling through the house like an empress surveying new territory. She photographed Eleanor's antiques, the photographs on the mantel, even the wallpaper in the hallway. Each click of her phone was a theft in miniature, a message sent no doubt to her father's development team. Look what's almost ours. We should get the paperwork signed tonight. Micah suggested, his fork scraping against the last crumbs of apple pie. No point in delaying the inevitable. Of course, I murmured, pushing back my chair. Slowly, deliberately, I stood, my movements weighted with the stiffness of an old man, every gesture crafted to sell the illusion of defeat. My back curved, my hand braced against the table, as though arthritic joints dictated my every step. I let the silence draw out heavy, oppressive, then said quietly, "Let me get the documents from the desk." And with that, I shuffled toward Eleanor's study, my lips curling into the faintest shadow of a smile where they could not see. But instead of the house deed, they expected I returned with papers that would shatter their ambitions like glass dropped on stone. I walked back into the dining room with deliberate slowness, the weight of Eleanor's mahogany desk key still warm in my pocket. They watched me as one might watch an old man shuffle through the final act of surrender, certain of victory. I lowered myself into Eleanor's chair at the head of the table, the chair she had occupied for birthdays, Thanksgivings, and Christmas dinners, and placed the heavy folder beside my plate of untouched dessert. Before we sign anything, I said, my voice calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to slice through their self-satisfaction, "There's something you both need to understand." Naomi barely looked up from her phone, her thumb scrolling, her smirk fixed. "What now, Silas? More sentimental nonsense about family memories?" She sighed, sipping Eleanor's wine like it was hers by right. "The house no longer belongs to you. Stop clinging." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile a poker player offers when holding a hand so strong it cannot be beaten. With slow, steady movements, I spread the legal documents across Eleanor's table, covering the embroidered tablecloth she had stitched with her own hands. "The house no longer belongs to me," I agreed softly. Then I looked them each in the eye. 3 days ago, I transferred it, every brick, every floorboard, every memory, to the Hope Against Cancer Foundation, in Eleanor's memory. The silence that followed was pure and absolute, like the hush of a cathedral after the final hymn. Micah's fork slipped from his fingers, clattering against the edge of his dessert plate before tumbling onto the china. His face, moments ago smug and controlled, drained of color. He reached with trembling hands for the documents, scanning the lines, his lips moving soundlessly as his world collapsed, sentence by sentence. Naomi froze, her wine glass arrested halfway to her lips, crimson liquid trembling dangerously close to the rim. Her eyes darted across the signatures, the seals, the notary stamp in the corner. This can't be legal," Micah rasped, his voice hoarse, his composure slipping. "You can't just give away $200,000 worth of property." "It's already done," I said, leaning back into Eleanor's chair, as though she herself had placed her hand on my shoulder. "Notarized, filed, accepted. The transfer is irrevocable. You can't touch this property ever again. Naomi shot to her feet so violently that her designer chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floors. Her phone clattered onto the table. You manipulative old fool, she spat, her voice trembling with fury. Do you have any idea what you've done? My father had contracts ready. Investors were lined up. This was supposed to be his windfall, I interrupted smoothly. His project, his profit. Well, your father can invest in someone else's neighborhood. As for this home, I gathered the papers into a neat stack, tapping them against the table with precision. Every dollar from its sale will go to cancer research, a gift in Eleanor's name, a legacy worthy of her life. Micah's face darkened, rage blotting out his pallor. He slammed his fist down on the table so hard that Eleanor's delicate china rattled one of the teacups, nearly toppling. We'll challenge this in court. You're senile, incompetent, this won't hold. I rose to my feet, and for the first time in months my spine straightened. My voice filled the room with something more powerful than anger, conviction. With what standing? I asked. You have no legal claim to a property I didn't even own when I made the transfer. Harold Thompson ensured every document was airtight. Your friend Judge Morrison, he can't conjure a case where none exists. Naomi's face turned a dangerous shade of purple, her polished composure cracking like porcelain under too much heat. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed. Well, enjoy your little victory, old man. You'll die alone in this house with no family, no support, no one to care when you're gone. I walked toward the front door, my steps steady, my chest rising with a strength I thought I had lost. I turned the knob and swung it open, letting the night air sweep into the dining room like a benediction. No, I said, my voice low, resolute, and steady as stone. I'll die in my home, our home surrounded by 40 years of happy memories, with a woman who actually loved me. And that Naomi is worth more than all your contracts, investors, and empty threats combined. The wind rustled the curtains. The documents lay on the table like a verdict. And for the first time all evening, it wasn't me who looked like the defeated one. You came here thinking you'd won, I said, each word sharp and deliberate, carrying the weight of a verdict. But you've lost everything. Now get out. The room seemed to freeze around us, heavy with the echoes of betrayal and the finality of truth. Micah's jaw tightened, the carefully maintained facade of control finally splintering. His hand trembled as he snatched his coat from the back of the chair. For once, his voice wasn't polished, wasn't steady, it cracked like a boy's. This isn't over, he spat, eyes burning with a mix of anger and shame. You'll regret this. I held the front door wide open, my hand firm on the handle, as though it were the last shield I'd ever need. My gaze never wavered. The only thing I regret, I said, my tone low and unwavering, is not seeing what you'd become before your mother died. She deserved so much better than this, from the son she loved, from the daughter she prayed for. Naomi's face twisted, but she had no words left. She brushed past me with a huff, the perfume she wore trailing behind her like smoke after a fire. Micah stumbled after her, pride in tatters, fury simmering beneath his skin. They stormed across the porch and into the night, their footsteps loud against the old wooden planks. I didn't move. I stood there silent, watching as they climbed into their polished BMW, slamming the doors with all the petulance of children denied their toys. The engine roared to life, headlights slicing across the driveway. They didn't look back, not once. They just drove off in furious silence, the glow of their taillights shrinking, then vanishing into the dark. I exhaled long and steady, as if I had been holding my breath for years. Then gently I closed the door, the sound final, like the closing of a book whose ending had been long overdue. That chapter of my life was finished. As I moved through the house, a calm I hadn't felt in decades began to settle over me. My hand brushed across Eleanor's favorite photographs lining the hallway, her smile captured in 100 different ways, lighting up the shadows. I paused at her reading chair, worn and softened by years of her presence, and let my fingers linger against its armrest as though touching her hand once more. In the kitchen, I ran my palm across the table where we had once planned our future, measured in meals, laughter, and love, rather than in profit and demolition plans. The Hope Against Cancer Foundation would own these walls now, but the soul of this place, the love, the memories, the laughter echoing in every corner, belonged to Eleanor and me forever. Justice had been served. Eleanor's name was honored, and our home, in the only way that mattered, had been protected. Some revenge is worth waiting 70 years to perfect. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to D-Daily Stories, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.